Your Bibles tonight, turn to Leviticus 23, Leviticus chapter 23, and we are going to finish up the feast as it relates to Leviticus 23. So we're going to look at, I think we have one more this year, maybe two more this year, but we're going to look at Hanukkah. So we're going to talk about what of it is biblically based or how we interact with it as a Christian. And we will actually study it, I think, with the way the sequences this fall right around Christmas time, or at least when Hanukkah is on schedule. So we'll do that later this year. And then also Purim from Esther. So we're going to talk about those two feasts and kind of what those look like in Israel today and where they came from. So we'll have those two more. But we're finishing tonight the feast as described in Leviticus 23. And just by way of reminder, we are talking about specifically Jesus, how we can see him, and what this means for us as New Testament believers. But Leviticus 23, and let's pick up in verse 33. Actually, we'll begin in verse 34. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the feast of tabernacles for 7 days unto the Lord. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. On the 8th day shall be an holy convocation unto you. And ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. It is a solemn assembly, and ye shall do no servile work therein. These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. To offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord, a burnt offering and a meat offering, a sacrifice, and drink offerings, everything upon his day. So we'll talk more about the verses that follow that in just a moment, but tonight we're going to talk about this for a few moments, tabernacles. So we're talking about feasting, and just an overview of our series again, Feasting in the Gospel, Discovering Jesus in the Feast of Israel. Nothing should get us as excited and festive as we consider our relationship with God, like the fact that we can abide with him and that he abides with us. So we tabernacle with God. And I think that we underappreciate the fact that the Holy Spirit has been put inside of us, unrevocably, irreversibly. Like, what's more intimate than that, right? And we can walk in the Spirit, we can live in the Spirit, he abides in us, we abide in him, all that goes with that, that's found in several places in the New Testament. The thing I notice in our day is that we do not treasure the presence of God as much as we should, and without feasting on it and feasting about it, we are prone to forget it or to undervalue it, and so we look to other places to find home, if you will. We look to other people. Sometimes nostalgia, we're getting close to the holidays here, and we know what the perfect scenario in our mind is, or we wish could be again, instead of leaning into and savoring primarily the abiding presence of the Lord. So the word we're going to talk about tonight is sukkot, is the word, if you're going from right to left in Hebrew. And this is the feast that is described in the verses that we just read through verse 43. This is the Feast of Tabernacles. So the Sukkot or the Sukkoth has the idea of booths. So the word booth is the word. If you think of like the Wayne County Fair booths, not the same, but kind of the same, that at least gives you something in our context. That's where we get this word, the Feast of Tabernacles or booths. It began on the 15th day of the 7th month for Israel. For 7 days, the Israelites would dwell in booths. That's seen in verse 42 that we'll get to in just a moment. This feast is also called the Feast of Ingathering in Exodus 23. And so it had to do with both remembering the tabernacles in the wilderness that we'll talk about briefly tonight, and also this idea of harvest. It was another wave of harvest, and so this feast was connected to both of those things. So tonight, to experience Jesus in the tabernacle feast, we must understand two divine agendas that God embedded into this feast that have implications not just for the Old Testament believer, but also for we are of the New Testament. So let's talk about those in the time that we have tonight. If I can advance my slide there, Brother Nick. Here we go. All right, we'll get to that in just a second. Pretend you didn't see that. Number one, tabernacles is about fire. So we're going to talk about how the sacrifices and the fire that was associated with this feast are important. I saw this little post. Again, maybe you don't think it's funny, but I think it's hysterical. The scenario is someone posted, you're getting laid off tomorrow and they don't know that you know. Okay? So the question is, what should I do to make this as uncomfortable as possible for my employer? And here were two ideas. Number one, bring in cupcakes because you're celebrating closing on your new house. All right? That might make it tough to fire you. Number two, and you just found out you're having twins. Okay? So it's a way to insulate yourself against maybe getting fired. You're using your house. You're using an asset or a life change to make at least them feel guilty as they do so. Tabernacles was about fire. And the two ideas of this that would be a part of the Jewish observance that still we would find in our day was this idea of fire and some indications or implications of that in the pictures that and messages that they convey. So two ancient temple customs that are still observed by the Jewish people to this day have some new covenant implications that are very interesting to dig into that we have just a few minutes to look at this evening. So let me give you two subpoints under that, and then we'll look at the text tonight. Number one, this fire that's associated with the Feast of Tabernacles, it provides a light. So you light a fire, it provides heat, but it also provides light, and that's kind of what's being conveyed here in this feast. If you go to verse 36, he says, 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire. So we see that the offerings that were given were to be not just, donated, but kept in perfect mint condition. They were meant to be burned upon the altar. If you want to read it on your own time, Numbers 29, verse 12 through 38. Numbers 29, 12 to 38 list out all the sacrifices that were a part of this feast. And we don't have time to study those tonight. But it likely, from everything I have studied, the Feast of Tabernacles involved the most extensive, ornate, prolonged season of sacrifices. There was more given to God, sacrificed to God in this feast, in one sense, than all the others combined. And so this was a very sacrificial, fire-fueled, if you will, festivity that God invites his people into. All right, go down to verse 37. He goes on to talk about this fire. These feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim, to offer an offering made by fire, a burnt offering, a meat offering, a sacrifice, a drink offering, everything upon his day. Verse 38, he, again, beside the Sabbaths of your Lord, beside your gifts, beside all your vows, and beside all your free will offerings, which you give unto the Lord. So this was a feast that was lit not by what people could get out of the festivities, but what they were investing into it. And I would just say to you today, I know you've heard me say this by now, you are as close to God as you choose to be. And the pivot of that is not what you get out of God and having that mindset of what can I, gimme, what can I get out of God? It is largely defined by you showing to God you want him in your life by giving sacrificially to him. Does that make sense? So we often view feasting as, hey, is it going to be a good party? Is the meal going to be good? Is the host going to give a bunch of, favors on the table? They're going to be handouts? That's not what we're talking about here. This feast of being in God's presence is not just about what God gives to us. It also requires of us to light, if you will, or to add to the feast with our own deep sacrifices. Now, what's interesting is, just a little sidebar, but if you look at verse 38, he says, and we'll talk about the Sabbath aspect in just a moment more, he said, besides the Sabbath of the Lord and beside your gifts, notice that word beside, repeated, and beside all your vows and beside all your free offerings which you give unto the Lord. And the idea here is that the extraordinary sacrifices are not to displace the regular sacrifices. So the best way I can explain that is this, and I think if you would ask me what is the weakness today of the postmodern Christian, this is definitely up there in my evaluation. At least it's an issue for me, and I see it in our ranks on a regular basis. Christians are good at the regular things they're to be faithful in and sacrificial to. But here's what I've noticed, and I'm not picking on you, I'm just saying I observe this. It's even in me, I see it. When there's an extra service, when there's an extra ministry, when there's an extra opportunity to give in some way. I think our church does by and large well at this, but the bent of our day is to not do anything extra. And I think we miss out on that next level. And I'm not talking about in a legalistic way, I'm just saying, if the church or God or a need infringes on your personal time, do you always shut it down? Well, I go to church on Sunday, but if there's something extra, that just doesn't fit my schedule. And I'm not picking on the guys who couldn't go. Many of you had good reasons. But to see men give a whole weekend to God these last 2 days and to see what God did in their hearts was incredible. They gave extra. They made time for that. The thing that the guys were joking about is like, it's prime hunting season, okay? And the guys who put the conference together are obviously not hunters, okay? But to see 600 plus men from all over the state of Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky get together and sing to Jesus and get preached at, and they were joking about, we're laughing and smiling, and they're just saying, you're a bunch of losers, you need to get right with God, and we're just, thank you, brother, we love this. This is amazing, It's the extra that gets us to the next level with the Lord. And all I'm saying to you is God is saying here, guys, when you get to the Feast of the Tabernacles and you're doing the extra things, don't stop doing the other things. Does that make sense? So to feast means now and then, not every day and every week, but there are times where God deserves just a little bit more, and we ought to do so not with reluctance, but with festivity. So one of the greatest hindrances to light and clarity with God is that we rarely, if ever, do the extra. And I think we live in a day of balance and moderation and boundaries, and I'm all for those things, but often underneath of that is just us opting out of things where God wants us to be extravagant. Like, are you ever accused of overdoing it for God? I don't know that anybody's ever said that to me. Maybe as a pastor now and then, slow down, calm down, you're getting a little excited. But in my personal life, am I known as someone who now and then, in their view, just gets a little too excited, quote unquote, about God and his goodness? So here's kind of how this would work. I'll just give you a summary. If you were in Jerusalem during the Feast of the Tabernacles, here's how the fire or the light would look if you were on the streets of the old city, if you were anywhere near the observance of this feast. So the usual sukkot ceremony that took place in the first century Jerusalem temple, obviously it's changed a bit since there's no temple today, but in Jesus' day, here's what it would have looked like. It's centered around a giant golden candlestick, or two of them actually. On the first day of Sukkot, there were three 75-foot high candlesticks that were erected in the court of women where the treasury was located. Do you remember where Jesus says she's given more than they all? The treasury where people would give to the temple to sustain it was the court of women. That's what he's referring to there. The wicks of these candles were made from the priest's old garments. I found that interesting. And in order to light them, young men would climb 75 feet up on ladders. These celebrations would continue for a full 7 days. On the 8th day, the lights were extinguished for a holy and solemn assembly. Light is a reminder of God's revelation and his guidance. So in Jesus' day, that's what it would have looked like. 3 of these 75-foot tall candlesticks, and the young bucks would climb up their ladders, they would light them, and they said that in the setting, from extra biblical accounts, that light would lighten almost every corridor in the city as that light was shed abroad in the city as they celebrated this Feast of Tabernacles. Now, real quick, go to John chapter 8, and this is fascinating. The part of this study that it's so hard for me to get it down to just the sizable time that we have together is how Jesus operated in a setting where these feasts were being observed. And he knew exactly why they had been instituted, and he knew what part they were showing of him connecting to his ministry. And this is just one of them that's just absolutely fascinating that I'm still digging into. John chapter 8, look if you will at verse number 20. John adds this kind of like aside or commentary on where Jesus was as he says what he says in chapter 8. These words spake Jesus in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. Now, what are the words that he said? Go back to verse 12. Then spake Jesus unto them, saying, I am the what of the world? The light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. So Jesus, he said these words in the place where these giant candlesticks were erected and observed, and likely, though they were not lit when he said these words, from everything I could sequence together, it was in the place where they were lit, and they were over his shoulder, maybe the backdrop, as he said to them, I am the light of the world. And so it's amazing to think about as God comes to earth and sends his son to this specific location to say these words that we just read there in John 8 and verse 12. I was reading the other day about a cathedral. The name of this cathedral is the Cathedral of Florence. The 15th century building in Italy has a small aperture at the top, so like a small opening at the top. Each year on the 21st of June, which is that the first day of summer? Is my mind right there? Yeah, first day of summer, the 21st day of June, the sunlight comes through it and hits squarely on a brass plate on the floor. If the light, according to this article, if the light does not cover the brass plate fully, there is concern that the building has shifted and foundational work begins immediately. Can I just say to you, is the light of God's presence squarely aligned with where you are tonight? Like, is your thinking a bit dim? Have you allowed this world in the darkness, not just physically, but otherwise spiritually, has it tainted and distorted and filtered out of your life the light of God's presence? This Feast of Tabernacles is to remind us of how much we need this light, how much this light is freely available to us, and listen, how much we should be feasting about it. The world's dark enough with God inside of us and God meeting with us tonight. Can you imagine this world without God's presence? He is not just the light of the city in heaven, he is the light of the world. And so this beautiful relationship with God we're reminded of, and it's foreshadowed in this Feast of Tabernacles. So we have access to a light that must be fostered long before we get into a dark season. Where are you not abiding in the tabernacle of his light through his word and his spirit? All right, number 2, jot this down. And this one would feel a bit like it's an oxymoron or opposites. Like, do these two things go together? So fire that provides, light. Number 2, fire that provides water. So normally we view fire and water as the opposite of each other. Go to verse 37. Go back to Leviticus 23. In verse 37, in one of the offerings that is offered, involves as you'll see here, water. Look at the end of the verse. He says, a burnt offering, a meat offering, a sacrifice, notice, and drink offerings, everything upon his day. So fire that provides water. It is still true today. Like, if you would ask me, what utility can your house not operate with? I'm telling you, I think I joked to you about when my son Ian was younger, his first thing was, we need internet access, okay? That was like, if the internet goes out, we can't survive. For me, I can go without power, I can go without, cable or internet, but water. Like, when a household loses water, it all comes to a screeching halt, doesn't it? And you got to get very creative on a lot of fronts without water. And it's unsustainable, right? So where we abide, where we dwell, where we tabernacle is always a place where we have access to water, right? And that's the idea here, especially as it connects to the feast and how it was observed in the Jewish culture. So this drink offering, this water thing is much bigger than just the literal liquid. There's a picture here that we can't miss. So let me give you again a summary. So they light the candles, these 3 75-foot candles. This is in Jesus' day. This would have still been occurring. Each day of the feast, a priest would come from the temple down to the pool of Siloam. All right, does that sound familiar to you? We have several stories in the book of Acts, especially, and in the gospel accounts that occur around that body of water. My own theory is possibly that pool was used to baptize the 3,000 that got saved on the day of Pentecost. Like, they had to find a big body of water to do that. I've seen that pool, or at least a remnant of it. So they would come down to the pool of Siloam from the temple, carrying a golden pitcher, not like a picture, okay, like a pitcher that holds water, okay? Are we all with me there? The priest would fill the golden pitcher with water from the pool and return to the temple, followed by the crowds chanting from Isaiah, "We will gather water from the wells of salvation," Isaiah 12:3, and from the Psalms, Hosanna, meaning save us now, Psalm 118, 22 to 24. The priest would make one circuit around the altar and then pour out the water, praying for God to provide what he alone could give. On the seventh day, the priest would go to the pool of Siloam with his golden pitcher, followed by the praising and worshiping crowds. He would return to the temple as before, but now the priest would circle the altar 7 times. With each circuit, the crowds would chant louder and louder in their cry for God's provision and God's salvation. So that's the rhythm. So you got the candles being lit, and then you've got this water being transported from the pool of Siloam to the altar at the temple. All right, hold your place there again in Leviticus and go to the Gospel of John to chapter 7. So again, we're bringing out Jesus, or at least his ministry and message, and how it connects to this Feast of Tabernacles. John chapter 7, and look, if you will, at verse 37. Again, this is my favorite part of this study, is not just the historical part, but how it weaves into Jesus' ministry. Just fascinating. John chapter 7, and if you would please quickly look at verse 37. In the last day, the great day of the feast, all right, picture what I just said to you. Jesus stood and cried, saying, "If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." That to me is incredible. Because like this, I'm the bread of life, I'm the light of the world, I have living water. Like I kind of just ripped that teaching out of the buildings and the calendar and the setting in which he taught it. Jesus taught these things at just the right time to connect himself to the fulfillment of these feasts. Isn't that incredible? I've never caught that before, that the beginning, to me, the beginning of the verse that we just read there about the feast, it's almost like that's just kind of setup material that's kind of random. Just so you know, in case it matters, this was the setting, versus like it's epic that it's there. And Jesus is presenting himself as the access point of living water during the Feast of Tabernacles as the golden pitcher is shuffling back and forth between the pool and the temple. It's incredible, showing how on point and on message, not just God in Jesus' day was, but all these centuries before, building to this moment where Jesus is saying to his people, listen guys, I'm him. He doesn't want them to miss it, and so he's so overt in it. And yet again, the Jews primarily and largely missed it. I have been trying to figure out how the church should interact with AI. Should we interact with AI? We already are, whether we want to or not, on many settings and platforms. But Google, who is leading the charge with several other companies, just released a study that their AI platform, Gemini, because there are concerns about energy usage for processors and storage and managing the heat that's generated by all of those systems. According to the study they just released, it only uses, they said, 5 drops of water per query, per question, was what they were trying to say. We don't use a lot of energy for our technology. We only use 5 drops of water every time you put in a prompt. If you're not familiar with AI, you're basically asking it a question, generate something, create something, collate or put some data in a certain form. Every time you put in a question or a command, it only takes 5 drops of water to keep the processing and all the technology that generates that cool. Isn't it crazy that with all of our technological advances, that we still need the basic element of water to sustain it? It's just amazing to me. The smarter we get and the more sophisticated we get, we still need these basic building blocks of our existence and our survival. And I find it ironic that of all the things we still need, with all of our technology, we still need a lot of water. And may I say to you tonight that we also, as God's people, we need the refreshment, we need the renewal that's only found when we feast in the water that he alone provides. Now, one other verse, I got to go to it. I can't jump over this. Go to Zechariah for just a minute. And I think this is what's being implied by the water analogy. Zechariah 14. So last thought on this, and we'll move to our second point tonight. Zechariah 14, look if you will at verse 16. So what does this mean if we don't feast in the fact that we can dwell with God and he dwells with us and Jesus is the tabernacle of God, the access point to God? Look here in chapter 14 of Zechariah. So right at the end of the Old Testament here, a couple books back from the end. And notice if you will verse 16. And I know I'm making you think tonight. If nothing else, write down these verses, go back to them. You can dig into this more in your own time. Would love to help you in any way that I can. Verse 17, or verse 16, it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which come against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This is really interesting. Verse 17, and it shall be that whosoever will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them there shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, then they shall have no rain. Neither shall there shall be plague, wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come up not to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacle. So when the average Jew heard this command to keep the feast, they knew if they didn't, that the water that would be lacking would be the water from above, the rain, the favor, the blessing of God. Could it be that the reason God is holding out on something in our lives, not in a prosperity gospel kind of way, but just in there's some things that hinge upon our choices and our decisions, us not being content with God and his presence in our life and stewarding well that presence and access we have to God, if we're mishandling that, why would God bless us further? Like, what's better than being able to live with God's presence every second of every day in our lives? And yet we think we need more. We think we need different. And so here we see the reminder that it is only when we are content in and faithful with the presence of God that God eliminates the dryness, the lack of things that we have in our lives. All right, number 2. Let's spend a moment here. Secondly, it is about booths. These booths that they would build, you can kind of see with the sermon graphic, even that picture there. Let's talk about this for just a moment as well today. So we've talked about the themes of water and light and how they turn our attention to the most foundational parts of the sukkah, or the sukkah would be the name of the booth itself. And so here in Leviticus, as we go back to it to finish tonight, we see that these booths also picture a few things that are important in how we feast on the gospel. All right, number 1, go back to Leviticus 23, and let's spend just a moment talking about these 2 points. Number 1, jot this down. Booths that provide a rest. So one of the benefits of celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles is that you didn't work and instead you just chilled in a booth. Doesn't that sound good? I'm for that, okay? As much as I'm a driven person, I wouldn't mind some booth time this week, okay? You want to build me one and you want to invite me over, I will come rest with you, okay? We will figure out something to do for that period of time. Booths were intended to be a place of rest. All right, for the kids tonight and for anyone else in the room, all right, kids, are you listening to me right now? How many of you have wondered this and you would love to see a gorilla who is sleeping and also having surgery done to him? How many kids would like to see that tonight? Raise your hand, all right? Even Carter in the sound booth. You sure you want to see it? It's a little scary. All right, here's the picture. I came across, this is from Cincinnati, a gorilla being worked on while he's out cold, okay? And there's all of these surgeons and people around him. And the caption at the bottom was this, bro, if he wakes up, it's over for everybody, okay? If he isn't sleeping, we all gone, okay? I don't know what a gorilla would do in a surgical room if they woke up. But it's key to keep that animal, 500, 600 pounds of him, sedated, right? Can I say to you, as it relates to our rest, nothing undermines us being the best version of ourselves, the godly edition of ourselves, more than the lack of rest. Think about the places you think of as home. It's not all the work you do. It's not the productivity of that place. It's a place you can rest. Like I remember going to college and you got to put on certain, profile or project certain things. Then you come home for Christmas break, as my boy will in a few weeks, and you're like, I can just be a slob, and they got to put up with it, right? You can rest. It's a place. And so this abiding in the Lord is not something to put on our best or just always be productive. It's a place that we can rest. So this booth idea has the idea of resting. All right, look at verse 35. I don't have time to touch on this at length, but just give you a couple things. Notice this in verse 35, that it was to begin with a day of rest. So the Feast of Tabernacles, and then if you look at verse 39, and in the 15th day, the 7th month, he says, on the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. So it was book-ended. Sabbath began the Feast of Tabernacles, and a Sabbath ended the Feast of Tabernacles, and all the other stuff they did between that we've already talked about, but it was book-ended with rest. Now look at verse 36. I found this interesting. At the end of verse 36, he says, and ye shall do no servile work therein. What is servile work? It is work of a slave. I find that one of our big issues is we are slaves to our schedules. We are slaves to our calendar. We are slaves to our pragmatism and our performance. And because of that, we don't have the space in our lives to rest, which then leads to more enriching feasting in the presence of the Lord. It's interesting because it's possible. The tabernacles is a picture not just of what has happened in the wilderness with the Jewish people, but I think it's foreshadowing the millennial reign of Christ, where the tabernacling will be reinstituted. And so it's possible that the first Sabbath is a picture of the millennium, and the second Sabbath is the picture of eternal rest. And these are just foreshadowing, again, what only is ours through the finished work of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm going to give you some verses. Just write down these verses if you're taking notes tonight. But in the feast themselves, in Leviticus 23, the word rest or Sabbath happens over and over and over again. Here are the verses. Just write them down. You can look at them on your own time. Verse 3, verse 7, this is all in Leviticus 23, where rest or Sabbath is referenced. Verse 3, verse 7, verse 8, verse 21, 3, 7, 8, 21, 25, 28. Are you still with me? 3, 7, 8, 21, 25, 28, 30, 28, 30, 31, 35, and 36. So I'll read them one more time. 3, 7, 8, 21, 25, 28, 30, 31, 35, and 38. So over and over, Sabbath and rest was a key to feasting. And I think here would be my submitting to you why we don't savor the gospel and see Jesus in the gospel as we should, is we just are too busy. We're working and striving and laboring, and as a result of that, we are not feasting as we should. I think we divorce these feasts from real life. Like the Jewish people, to have an 8-day feast where they build these tabernacles, I'll show you a picture in just a second, and to go outside of their homes, that did not just neatly fit into their schedule in a way that you can't do. Could you carve out 8 days to have rest before the Lord? I don't know if you can or not, but can we at least do 1 day a week or have a Sabbath that's a little more meaningful and prolonged at different seasons of life? Not to just do fleshly things, but to feast in what God has done for us. That's the spirit of all of these feasts. To feast, we have to first learn to rest. And I think this is the issue. So if you would ask me, why are people not as giving as they should be, like in the church setting or in other settings? I don't think it's because we are misers. I don't think it's because we're stingy. I think it's because we have too much trust in what we do to provide for ourselves instead of trusting in God to provide for us. And I came across this thought the other day. If you have rest issues, you probably have trust issues. Can God keep the planet going while you sleep tonight? Yeah. And he also can keep the planet going while you're wide awake and still choosing to not overdo it, right? I think we take on too much, and so we don't rest, and so therefore we can't feast. That's the sequence that needs to change if we're going to be everything that God wants us to be as his people. So you can only truly sleep when you feel safe. Have you ever been in a setting? I was talking about this the other night with some of our guys at the men's conference. I think it was there. Heidi and I had a trip where we were staying in Miami for one night, and I am sure that hotel room had bed bugs. And it just was a long night. I thought I saw them jumping, usually it seemed like they were from Heidi's hair, over to me. I'm just kidding. But you could feel I didn't sleep a wink that night because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel clean, all that goes with that. Like rest is combined with feeling safe and protected. And when we're in relationship with Jesus Christ, we have that. We have to take advantage of that to be able to feast. All right, secondly, number 2, lastly, booths were meant to provide a reminder. So they were meant to provide a season of rest for the Israelites, and Jesus wants to be that for us as well. Also, they were meant to provide a visible reminder. So they do different variations, but this is what it would look like. Typically, it's a 3-sided booth that's, could be plywood, could be sheets, and then they spread these branches over top. Typically, it's close or adjacent to the home, and the whole family moves outside of the house with running water and, all the modern amenities that we have today. They still do this. And they will build this Sukkoth, and they will live in it for these days, and they will observe the Feast of Tabernacle. So the booths are meant to provide a reminder. What's sad is that the Jewish people are only thinking backwards versus also forward. And for us as New Testament believers, this Feast of Booths is to remind us of something more than just the history of the Israelite people. It's also about our history with Jesus. So notice a couple things quickly as we finish. In verse 40, he talks about what they're to put on top of it. These boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of thick trees, willows of the brook. So all these different layers of branches that were to be used to construct these booths, really to remind them of God's faithfulness and his covering, his shade, his provision that he had provided for them in multiple seasons as a nation. Verse 41, you shall keep the feast of the Lord 7 days in the year. It shall be, notice, a statute forever in your generations, and you shall celebrate in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. So it was meant to continue, not just to be for a season. They were to, in perpetuity, observe this feast and everything that it pictured about the coming Messiah. Verse 43, that your generations, here's the big reason why, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So ultimately the feast was meant to remind them that God had provided this shade in the heat and the arid culture of the wilderness season, and that God was still providing that provision for them in the present tense. I don't have time to go there, but just write down the reference, John 1, verse 1 and verse 14. I believe that the Feast of Tabernacles ultimately is a foreshadowing of God tabernacling with men through the Word being made flesh and dwelling among us, and we beheld his glory, the glories of the only begotten of the Father. John chapter 1, right? So it is a picture of Jesus and God specifically tabernacling with us. Did not the Messiah at times appear weak and flimsy? Didn't he feel like it was kind of just, you would overlook him? Isaiah talked about he had no comeliness. Like that's not what I just showed you. That's not an impressive building. Jesus Christ, when he came to tabernacle with us, there was nothing about him that was like, wow, check out that construction or that building or that body or that man. He was a run-of-the-mill man and often overlooked and misunderstood, just as these tabernacles, as the Israelites would sit in them and lay in them, would have also, I'm sure, been viewed. So it pictures our life. We're pilgrims. This is not our home. We look to Jesus to be the source of our relationship with the Lord. All right, let's end tonight in Revelation 21. Would you go there for a moment? If you'd like the other 7 pages of my sermon notes tonight, I'll get those to you, okay? You can probably sense that. There's so much here. But for sake of time, let's go to Revelation chapter 21. We have a brief church family meeting as well tonight. I want to be considerate of your time since it's been dark for 7 hours already. Revelation. Somebody was joking about, it's so nice now. It gets dark, the sun sets during my lunch break at work. So doesn't that feel like that? It almost does. Revelation 21. And let's look at verse number 3. And again, we just read over these verses and we miss these things if we're not careful. John talks about the new heaven, the new earth. By the way, heaven, listen, is not just some heavenly city that we're going to leave earth and go dwell in forever. Heaven comes to earth. You do know that, right? Like much of what we picture and visualize about heaven is not out in some space city floating and drifting. It's here. Like John's clear on that. If you read the story, as a bride adorned for her husband, it's coming down to the new heaven and the new earth. Those things are merged together. Verse 3, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, when that happens, behold, the what of God? Tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And so this ends with tabernacle. That's unbelievable, and that is only possible because of Jesus Christ, who is foreshadowed in the feast of Leviticus 23 and clearly is referenced here in Revelation chapter 21. Our housing and sharing eternity in a common dwelling with God, if that doesn't give you what you need to be excited about God and the gospel and grace, then you really need to revisit your theology. It is incredible. A house, by the way, that will be one perpetual feast forever. Like the Father's house is not going to be like, okay, kids, let's do chores and not saying there won't be some of that stuff. It is one ongoing party forever, all around the throne, all about the Lamb, not in the sense we may think of as it relates to a festivity or party, but it will be a festive occasion that will never, ever end. All right, let me end with this sobering challenge. Because all of us have somewhere that's home for us. Where is your safe place? Where is the place that you long to dwell? Who is it that you long to be with in their presence that satisfies you and sustains you in ways that nothing or no one else can? If we are not careful, it is everything and anything but our God. And I came across this statement the other day. This is so good. One road leads home, and 1,000 roads lead into the wilderness. Like, you may not choose the wandering direction toward, quote, home that I would, but you're going to choose one, and I guarantee all of them lead to the same place, and it's not the place where God is. Are we willing, even as believers, to look for home, to long for home, to savor what previews we have of it in the present tense, by keeping our eyes on Jesus Christ, who is the tabernacle. He is the Word in the flesh. The Jewish people are still looking for that, aren't they? Okay, so they got their nation, and they got their homeland, and they're still battling and fighting and clawing for it, and they're looking for deliverance and somebody, including our current president, to get them out of the pinches they're in. There's only one who can do that, and he's already come, and he's coming back again. And we as New Testament believers ought to already be feasting about that, and sharing that and conveying that and embodying that to those who have yet to believe it. So without regular tabernacling with Jesus in this broken world, you and I are prone to forget about the forever festivities that are ours that we will share with him someday. We must keep feasting to remember that truth. So will you tonight start feasting with the tabernacle of the gospel, that's Jesus, and depend upon him for his fire, this fire that provides light, this water that provides refreshment, and will we look to the booth that he alone is that provides rest, a place to find rest, a place to find the reminders we need in our relationship with the Lord. Let's pray together.